Welcome to Parenting for the Present, episode 2 of season 9. We decided we wanted to do one more episode just with the three of us. We had the really fantastic opportunity to present at Boone Elementary and University Park this past week. And we presented on a topic we called it Growing Up Wired, Technology's Impact on the Developing Brain. And the feedback was so positive and grateful and asking for more information, frankly, that we thought we'd do an episode on it. So here we are today. Um, so we really want to talk about, let's unpack how technology, phones, social media, and screens are shaping our kids' brains and what parents can realistically do about it. Matthew and Eve, does that sound doable or does that sound daunting?
It's a really
Both.
common question we
Both.
get. Yeah, it's both. Exactly. It's a common question we get. We field it a lot. And the reason is we don't have a lot of information to give families. And so we're all flying by the seat of our pants. We don't have longitudinal data that can support science. And so as clinicians, we're trying to be thoughtful, monitor what we're seeing kind of in real time, and then give advice. And so Eve spent a lot of time looking at the current data, did a really great presentation that she put together in PowerPoint, and Early and I kind of tagged along for this one. And Eve, I'm going to throw it to you to kind of get us started on what do we know? What's the data say? We'll cover the neuroscience behind what we know so far, but hopefully this will be an informative uh, podcast for parents because it's a common question.
It is a common question. It does come up a lot. And the biggest thing that I tell parents is, we really do have to rely on the developmental perspective of this. Just like we don't give a 4-year-old the keys to our car to drive, we're not going to give them, all exposure to all technology over time. Is eventually what we do, but we won't do that in the beginning. And the reality is, we don't know what the research is going to say in 20 years. And we don't have strategies from our parents because we didn't grow up with the technology. I got a cell phone, I think, when I was 18 years old. And, now I give my 5-year-old the iPad and she can edit and change the background and do all this kind of stuff that, like, I still don't even know how to do. So we have to recognize that our kids are going to outsmart us on this all of the time, but we can have thoughtful conversations and come up with family rules and family values and what are those boundaries we are going to give our kids for it. So let's go to the developmental part. So if we're looking at their brain, they are not going to have certain structures of the brain that are fully developed to be able to navigate the complexities of technology. The reality is we are never going to outsmart Apple engineers. All of the games that they create with the extra like in-app buy-ins, or my gosh, if I hear from my son one more time, Tuesday and Saturday admin abuse for Roblox or whatever it is. That is what's happening is they are getting flooded with this dopamine and that reward circuit is activated, and that's when we start to see the behavioral and emotional dysregulation. And it's really hard because that reward circuit is going to eventually start to look like executive function weaknesses in kids with the impulse control that is still under construction. And they don't have the prefrontal cortex that is part of that decision making and self control, and they won't have that until they're 25 years old. But they are hardwired just because of survival reasons in the brain. Their limbic system is just going to be more sensitive to the emotional and the reward cycle. And it's really, really sensitive in adolescence. And that's why we start to see it around fourth or fifth grade. I want a phone, or I want social media, or my friend has this, it's not fair. Those types of conversations, because that's usually the age where peer influence is going to be stronger than parental influence. Either one of you want to add anything to that part?
Well, first of all, this is like texting with you, Eve. You said a limbic system and you assume everybody knows what you're talking about. So let's go back to the
Mm-hmm.
limbic system. Eve will send me text, guys, and it'll
Oh
say,
gosh.
"Hey, did you talk to Mary?" And I'm like, all right, Eve, give me a little more context here.
I
So
just
limbic
want, can
system.
I put a little
Read my
anecdote in
mind.
here? If you're calling out Eve for not explaining what the limbic system is, Eve mentioned PowerPoint. You mentioned PowerPoint earlier, and it was Canvas. So I think there's a little back and
All right,
forth here.
thank you. Thank you, Early, the
I'm
protector
here
of
for
Eve.
you, sir.
Thank you, Early. I appreciate
Yes.
it. All
All
right,
right,
Matthew, tell us, what is the limbic system,
yeah,
Dr.
limbic
Hausen?
system. Thank you, Eve. So limbic system, this is the emotional part of our brain. So we all have heard of the three F's related to the brain: fight and flight and freeze. And so any of you parents who have tried to take away an iPad or a phone from a child who was deeply engrossed in a video game got an F. The child got angry, they fought, they got angry, they ran, or they just melted. And so the limbic system is that part of our brain. It's down in the middle part of our brain where our emotions live. This is when we're regulated or dysregulated. And what happens when children are dysregulated, you cannot reason with them. So you can go through all the research that you may have read or that you may, that we may think we know about why it's bad for them and why 15 minutes is better than 30 minutes and, blah, blah, blah. But our children aren't listening. And so once our children are dysregulated, there's really only two things that work. One is time, let them kind of burn through their disappointment, or something sensory. When babies are upset, we pick them up and we hold them. When our 6 or 8 or 12-year-olds are upset, we need to let them shower. We need to let them go for a walk. We need to let them, separate themselves and try to calm down. So the limbic system is in this pathway with the prefrontal cortex that you talk about. So prefrontal cortex is why gambling is engaging and why jumping out of a plane is a dopamine hit. All of these things are high dopamine things, and the games and the video games and the technology taps into that brain. But when we lose it, we have a loss of dopamine, and that's when our limbic system gets triggered. So
I think
this
my
is
kids
why
give
we're
me a different F word, but maybe that F word goes into the fight umbrella of it.
yeah, it comes out. Some of that may be modeling. I'm teasing with you.
Actually, only if it's in context is it acceptable in our house. Then I
That's
can't be
great.
mad.
As long as they get it right. But it, but
Yes.
but that emotional dysregulation is really significant, and
Hmm.
the intensity is because, I think developmentally we're giving children turbo at way too early of an age, and they don't have the ability to handle the speed at which these things are firing off dopamine neurons in their brain. And so, and as parents, we feel helpless because they're so happy, right? Can I go get my thing? Can I get my thing? They got their thing, but then bedtime comes or study time comes. So there's some real no-nos here, right? We don't want to do the high dopamine thing until the low dopamine activities are completed. So it's a mistake to give children an iPad before their homework's done or their room's cleaned. Those can be reinforcers or rewards for doing it. And then you have to think strategically. So we talk a lot about proactivity. You have to be proactive when you're setting up the times and situations where your child is playing the games, to ease them into another dopamine activity that may not be as high, but that will be an easier come off. Because if you're going from 100 miles per hour to nothing, you're going to see limbic system involvement and dysregulation.
Let's dive into some of those strategies that you just brought up because one thing that we talk about when we are working with parents and we're using Daniel Siegel, his brain model. And so, for those of you who are listening and not watching on YouTube, if you hold your hand up in a 5, you make it a 4, and then you close your fist. This is how we explain the brainstem, the limbic system is the thumb, and then the prefrontal cortex right here that is protecting the limbic system, that's where the control is. Now, when your child flips their lid like this, the limbic system, which is the emotion, is controlling and not that prefrontal cortex. So they're not able to access those higher regions of the brain. So, some of the ways and strategies, like Dr. Hausen was discussing, is we use that choice giving method. If you choose to do all of your homework, to get 100% ready for bed, to eat your dinner, all of those low dopamine activities, then you choose to have your iPad. So this takes the power struggle out of you kind of being the executioner, and it helps you be consistent too of when they can have it and when they can't have it. Because for kids, no doesn't mean no, it means not right now. So they will wear us down 100% of the time, and they're really good at it. So, choice giving method. If you choose to do this, then you choose to get that. The other technique that I really like when it comes to getting your kid off of that iPad is to connect, and then you can disconnect. So if they are on their iPad, I'm going to sit right next to my child and I'm going to ask them, "What are you watching? Who's this character right here?" Because I want them to disconnect with their eyes to engage in conversation with me. Then I can give them the direction to disconnect. And so those are two kind of strategies of and examples of us working parallel with the technology instead of working against it and creating that dopamine trap where we get the emotional dysregulation.
And Eve, what you're doing when you do that is you're going to limbic system, you're meeting them at their emotion, and you're naming the emotion, right? Or connecting to them, which allows a come down from the high of the dopamine activity. So I think the connection piece is really important. The problem with that as a parent, that's not what you want to do at that point. You just want them in bed. But if you invest that 2 to 5 minutes doing what you're talking about, it really does save you time over time.
I like, Eve, how you really made that practical too, because I hear a lot of people say, well, you need to give your kid a 5 minute warning or whatever, and they just say, hey, it's 5 minutes, but there's nothing you did to connect. So I like what you said. Hey, talk to me a little bit about what's going on here and what the characters are doing, and I think that's great. Matthew, I'd also never heard kind of that. It's not that I've never heard, but I thought it was neat. The low dopamine versus high dopamine. And clearly, I think you gave examples of low dopamine being, I got to do my homework, or my
Hmm.
chores, or as we call them in our house, contributions, because the family doesn't run without the contributions. They ain't chores. And I may
I
have
like
stole
that.
that from Dr. Housen. And then the high dopamine, there is the artificial, right, like with the screens and technology, but maybe can we talk about some other high dopamine activities that could be more productive off in real life?
Well, I mean, I think that's where we want our children engaging. We'll talk in a little bit about just how we moved away from socialization post-COVID into a virtual world and then all the fallout of that. So we want it to be where interacting with others and connecting with others is high dopamine because it's fun to play games. I mean, I think about our family vacations. We always look forward to going away so we can play cards. So it's like, why aren't we playing cards at home? It's
Right.
actually
We have
fun.
cards at home, people.
Just don't have time for
And
it.
Exactly
exactly.
right.
And
Yeah.
then clearly sports and anything competitive, that's high dopamine. And I think that um, those are the things that we enjoy and that we want to steer our children to. And as our kids get older, we want things like reading and music, etc. But when they're younger, it really does involve, being with your friends, getting on your bike, going down the street to see who's playing. And so movement back towards that direction, I think is the direction that we want to go. I think it's also important, and we talked about it earlier when we were at Boone, is just what the data shows about children being wired. And this certainly comes out of the Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Eve, you want to talk a little bit about what the data shows and kind of the timing of the introduction of the iPhone and the iPad and what we're seeing now with kids?
Yeah, so he looked at around, I forget if it was 2008 was the
It's
first
like
iPhone, like
2008.
around that time, and looking at just anxiety and depression measures in particular. And so what the data and what his graph has ultimately shown is that the more screen time and the more social media presence at an earlier age, the higher the anxiety and the depression. And that trend is something that we have seen and he has tracked since the entrance of the iPhone. And I mean, I can say it in our office. We are seeing a ton of anxiety and a ton of depression. And even though we feel like our kids are more connected and we are more connected more than ever, I hear all of the time that people are actually more lonely because so much of it is completely curated and they're not getting the reality. It's just I took 100 pictures and I picked the best one and then I threw it through AI and I made me look really good. And we can just kind of curate things that make everybody else feel like crap. So we see a sharp rise in adolescent anxiety, depression, and self-harm, especially in girls. And we're seeing an increase of the eating disorders. But I mean, we could probably do an entire episode on, body image and social media. Um, we are also seeing a decline in in-person socialization, extracurricular activity involvement, and then independent play. I can't tell you how many times I'll have a kiddo in the playroom and they don't know how to play with toys. So it is so fascinating that just like that basic instinct, they want the iPad. They'll ask me, "Can I have your phone?" I'm like, "No, you can't have my phone. Like you need to play with the plugs." But the other thing that we've also seen, which is Dr. Housen's favorite thing to talk about, is the sleep hours for teens have dropped, but the screen hours have risen drastically. And so part of that could be because kids or teens are taking their phones into their bedroom and they're just doom scrolling, and before they know it, it's 3 hours have passed. And so it's harder for them to disconnect, which means they're not ready for that level of involvement. But those are the trends that we've been able to isolate through his research.
And early, I thought it was interesting. We had, several parents come to the talk on Tuesday, and there were a lot of questions around the timing of introduction of the iPad, the iPhone, smartwatches for kids. You're the pediatrician. What's the American Academy of Pediatrics say about some of these things?
So, and one of the things we talked about that I think before we just talk about the age things that I just want to remind, there was another parent we were talking, you remember about that idea of the family media plan and this
Hmm.
idea of, if you bring up decreased play, decreased sleep, decreased in-person socialization. So if you go to healthychildren.org, there's something called the family media plan. And on the in the family media plan, the idea is like we all have 24 hours in our day, and so we need to. Eve, I'm gonna give a plug for Dr. Housen's favorite subject again. We got to get our sleep right. Like teens should ideally be sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night. We know how that's not happening. uh, we talk about we need to exercise. We got to go to school. We got to do our homework. We need to take a shower, please, as a teenager, especially those boys. And then, so you see how the 24 hours, like if you're going to spend more than an hour or two during the weekday on screens, something's going to give. And we know it's usually sleep. And then I think the point two being in-person socialization as well. So I just wanted to give a plug for that because I think that's been really helpful. And it also brings out the idea that we have to model um, the technology, right? Because if our kids see us, there was also a lot of like, one of the audience members brought up, well, life is so digital now, and I need to be on my phone a lot. And Matthew, before I go back to what the AAP says, you had a pretty good answer in terms of if you find yourself on technology too much and how you can kind of own that and be accountable with your own kid. Do you remember your
Yeah, no,
answer to that?
I think just acknowledging, you know what, that's right. You were talking to me. I was looking at my phone. Let me put this up. Because, one of the myths that we know is technology is not the problem, right? It's with us. It's going to be part of it's going to be part of our lives. It's the intensity at which kids are engaging with it, the timing and the interference that it has in other activities. Does it interfere with homework? Does it interfere with like that example you gave early with us just paying attention to our children? And I think when we're not engaged and when we're not socially present or emotionally present, we need to acknowledge that for the children.
Yeah,
I
I
think that
agree.
starts the younger they are because they're going to get an iPad likely before they're going to get a phone. And in between there, they're going to get maybe an Apple Watch or a Gizmo. And there is something else that I found with, a guest that will be coming on with us that I'm very excited about. Her name is Mandy Grass, and she's a behavioral specialist. And on her website, she actually has a tech contract, that is like a free resource. And it's less based on kind of what we were talking about, in that talk, and it's more about behavioral based. Like, for example, if I argue or beg for one more time, I will lose phone privileges for the next day. I will be able to use my phone for a period of time with my parents, and I have talked about it and agreed on it. So, really, just putting forth those family values, those family rules, and expectations. So, you have that reference point to go back and say, oh, you violated one of those. Because really, what we want our kids to understand is like the older you get and the more mature your behavior shows, then you will get more access to things. So right now, as a fifth grader with an Apple Watch, and you can control the social media whether they download it or not, and you don't have that, you have everything you need. We talked too about the concept of a kitchen phone, where there is a family cell phone that is in the kitchen that is not personal for anyone. But if I need to know where my kid is after baseball practice, or they need to be able to have a phone to call me when band practice is out, or whatever, fill in the blank, that there is that. Or just bringing back the landline, and allowing kids to talk and discuss that way. So there are a lot of, things that you can start early that are really building healthy tech habits and conversations, and making it to where putting that responsibility back on the child. Once you earn and show that level of maturity, then you'll be ready for the next phase.
I think just expanding on that, Eve, for the families who haven't, their children are young enough that you haven't introduced technology, I think it's really important to, in a proactive way, say, we will know that you're ready for your Apple Watch when you do X, Y, and Z. So each of these things should be developmentally timed. We don't allow 12-year-olds to drive cars because they're not developmentally wired to do that. And so in a similar way, um, we feel that seventh, eighth grade developmentally, and remember, anytime you're talking about development, you're talking about a bell curve. Some children are going to be 2 years ahead, some children are going to be 2 years behind. So it's important, and if a child's ready for a phone, if they're taking care of their sleep habits, if they're exercising, if they're independent on their homework, if they're keeping their obligations. If they're not, then the phone is going to be a confound on the things that they're already struggling with. And
Mm-hmm.
so if before you introduce the technology, you lay out the expectations of what the child has to do, then it sets you in the right direction.
Let's do a little game of myth versus
Myth
fact.
versus fact.
So
I'm going to
fun.
ask the
All right.
questions though. Okay. Dr. Dennison and Dr. Hausen, if my child is home on their phone, they're safe. Is that a myth or a fact?
I hit the
I'm
button first. I
sorry to
think
laugh, but
that's
yes, go
a
ahead, Dr.
myth.
Housen.
I hit the button first.
Raise your
It's a myth.
hand.
It's a myth. It's a myth. It's a myth.
And why is that?
Well, I think that we're all been worried about the person breaking into our home, or, the guy at the park, but those situations are really very rare.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many avenues through social media. And remember, everybody, Roblox and Minecraft, that is social media. And so there are lots of different avenues for strangers to come into your home and provide influence that, isn't in keeping with the way that you all do things in families. So that's usually where a lot of the AI scammers, come in, through that content, not to mention just, comments from unkind comments from other children that may be connected. So it's really important, especially with our younger children, that you're monitoring any of those games that have a social component to them.
Hey, Eve, can you briefly tell that story that you told at the presentation about Roblox and the grooming?
Yes. So it was based on grooming behavior. There was a kiddo who was playing Roblox, thought that they were playing with someone their age and in their cohort, and felt really comfortable. They understood them, kind of that whole thing. But what ultimately ended up happening is that person asked for pictures of this child and, the parents' names and things like that. And so the perpetrator went on, figured out names of friends from, mom posted a picture and tagged these other kids. So he had names of these kids in his school. And the kids sent the pictures, and they were nude photos. And then that person turned around and started blackmailing them. Like, I'm going to tell little Johnny that and share these pictures with them. And so what the ask was is the perpetrator said, "You go get your mom's credit card and take a picture of it and send it to me, and then I won't share these photos." And so that's how they ended up getting mom's credit card. Mom found all these charges. Kid was confronted with it. Kid said some pretty strong things about being very sad and prompted to get them into therapy. And so that mom felt like, well, he's just playing with kids his age. It's, a game for kids. It's in my own home. And it turned out to be a very difficult case. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that. Whether it's someone getting busted and then that picture, getting back and identifying that child, and it's part of a big ring. So it is really sad to see that level of grooming going on, and it's a problem.
And that unfortunately, I have a similar but different story. It really does happen more than we think, and the consequences are pretty significant because,
Hmm.
again, when a child is faced with that level of kind of anxiety and fear, it's really hard for them to problem solve through it. And hopefully they can use their parents as resources to work through it. But they're very, very, very hard situations.
10-year-old doesn't have the skill set to be able to navigate a situation like that, especially alone.
Is there
Absolutely.
is there a takeaway for parents there in terms of, I think back to the I'm gonna love you no matter what, and there's nothing you can ever bring to me or talk to me about that will make me feel differently. So how does a parent not only, okay, so your kid wants to play Roblox, how do you monitor that? And then if something does go off the rails, how does the kid feel empowered to know to come to the parent?
I think a lot of it is centered around, the conversations. Well, early on, it is, we don't play these games with strangers. And so whether that is, I forget the exact terminology in Minecraft, like world building or realm, you can create a realm where only their friends play on a server or something. But then just 100% the messaging feature is just absolutely off limits. So can you disable that? And then letting them know that this is for your protection. And just having those conversations. It's okay for you to get their iPad and kind of comb through it. And I tell my kids all the time, whether you're in a group message or in anything, that if you send something, you make sure you send it knowing that someone's mama is reading it. And if you don't want your mama finding out or their mama finding out, then don't send it. And so just kind of making sure that they understand that there are some of those check-ins that, I am here to help you navigate things because I want to be that lighthouse parent. I want you to come towards me, especially when things are hard, so I can help you problem solve. And I want to be your partner in that.
And I think it's also important, from the beginning when we're setting this up, if you think about how we're socially constructing these places to play for our children, there's a whole industry around gaming chairs and gaming designs and gaming rooms. And that's, again, industry driving psychology. Psychology would tell you that if children are going to be interacting with other children, it should be in an open part of the home where the parent knows what's going on and there's not privacy around it. You don't need privacy. You can have enjoyment of the game, but also parent supervision. And so I think there's just been so many norms that have shifted where children feel a bit entitled to have their thing and be in their space and say their things without any oversight. And fortunately, a lot of schools have kind of taken that back and said, okay, we're not going to have cell phones in schools, and we are going to take back kind of the learning space. And that's what we need to do in families. And then related to that is this is the community of parents. So if your child is playing with other children, make sure that you're playing with other children that you know the families and that they have similar values, because that's what happens when it comes to their phones, and that's what happened when it comes to, you know, um, where is so and so allowed to drive once they start driving. I think driving is such a good metaphor that we're really good about sticking to driving rules. We just have to get that good with phones.
Well, let's keep going on that one because we say all the time, if you're driving down the road at night, those reflectors on the road are there to keep you safe. And so that is what you're doing as a parent is you are creating the boundaries and the reflectors to make sure that your child is staying on the right road and you can let them go back and forth, in between those two lines. But it's, also not being afraid to do something different than their best friend's parents are doing too. Like we don't ever like to feel that our kids are being left out, which is why that is one of their most powerful statements is to be like, I'm the
Right.
last one. Like you hate me. I tell my kids all the time, if your worst trauma when you're 30 years old in your therapist office is my traumas from my mom not giving me a phone in fifth grade, I am so proud of myself. Like, I'm okay with that. I will be able to sleep at night when it comes to that. So it's, just reinforcing those boundaries is really, really important. Okay, let's go to that myth. Or fact, JK. What about when your kids say, I'm going to be left out if you don't give me my phone and I don't get social media. All my friends have it. Because I feel like that's the one we hear the most, right?
You hear it a lot. I mean, it really
Yeah,
does
I'm gonna
tap into
vote. I'm
our
gonna go with
fears.
fact. No, myth,
They
myth,
totally will be left out. Oh no.
myth.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
so Matthew, you want to riff on that a little bit?
yeah, no, I mean, I think it really does, like you're saying, our kids are really smart people, right? They understand what makes us tick. They can read our facial expressions. They can see our muscles move when we're excited, when we're disappointed. And they know that if they tell us that they're hurting or left out in some way, we're going to be there to fix it. But it's a problem. And the reality of it is if they are overly engaged in social media and they go down rabbit holes, then it undermines their social development because they don't have the ability to interact in person and talk. All four of our children are very social with their phones, and they text and meet up with their friends. But there's a point where when friends come over, I'm like, everybody put phones up. You guys just interact with each other because it's such an interesting phenomenon, and people, my age and just are in awe of how children interact. But we have to do things differently. Do
And I
you
think
want to
it's
say that?
important to also identify this too. Being different is not the same as being left out. And so,
Mm,
how do we say that to our kids to show them the difference? Because my biggest takeaway here is that if you are a parent and, there's this whole movement called Wait Until Eight, which is wait until eighth grade, and you sign the contracts and that way it's like this peer, it's like, oh, well, you're not the only one because I know our entire little group here is not doing this. So nice try, kid. But I think that leads to those healthier peer groups and interactions. But my biggest takeaway from that is the difference between resiliency and conformity, too. If our kids can learn to stress tolerance, if they can learn to tolerate that short-term discomfort, which is I don't have what everybody else has, it builds long-term confidence, and that skill pays off far beyond any technology, especially early adoption. And so I know it's not going to prevent loneliness because that's another one I hear a lot with kids. I'm just so lonely because I'm the only one. Um, well, what we know is actually early access is correlated with those higher rates of loneliness and anxiety and depression. And kids need to know that they can be connected online and still feel excluded. And I think a lot of people, even I know myself as a as an adult, if I'm scrolling through my phone and I see, a group of friends and they're at dinner and I'm like, oh, I didn't get invited. I mean, actually, low key, I call it JOMO, the joy of missing out. But let's just pretend like I'm not JOMO and I'm more in FOMO camp. Then my FOMO gets activated, and I'm a grown adult. So I think it's just a really important conversation to differentiate between those two things too, and to really focus on the resiliency. Because I think if we understand the why we are doing this, then it helps us not give in to our kids.
One of the things I completely agree with everything you said. Even I'm gonna have to look up JOMO, and I think I know FOMO, and
Joy
uh,
of missing out.
yeah, I know. I was, there was I was, Matthew and I at the presentation on Tuesday, there was a reference to, I think it was a GIF, is that fair, Eve, on Morgan Freeman. And even though I was like, the Gen Xers here, we need some explanation. Anyways,
What
so
was it like when the dinosaurs were alive?
oh, I can tell you, they were fabulous. So and the whole thing about this being a myth that you're going to get left out, I think it's easier in 2025 now that Jonathan Haidt has put out the book, and there is this power of community where you can go to your kids' friends and your friends and say, "Hey, what do you think about this wait until late?" And just Eve, I'm thinking, can we clarify? Eighth grade, not 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So wait till eight on the phone. Also, this realization that phone does not equal social media. It does not equal, even at first, an internet browser, right? Like you can give your kid a phone, even if it's a quote smartphone, and it can be quote dumb, right? Where it just makes calls and text. And then to Matthew's point, when I see this, then you'll be ready, that kind of thing. The other thing I wanted to, so one, your kid is not gonna necessarily be out there by themselves, because there is the power of like, hey, you're not the crazy person anymore talking about this. But the other thing, this idea you guys talked about in the talk about social media in high school, and maybe easing your kids into it based on a series of expectations about what you want to see. The flip side of that being, hey, if you're not taking care of your grades and you're cutting curfew or whatever it is, we can dial that back. But your point was, and I think it was well taken, if you don't start letting your kids have some exposure to some sort of social media communication in high school, they're either going to work around you, or they're going to wait until college and then be kind of lost when they're out on their own. So can you all talk a little bit about your thoughts about how maybe, okay, so we all here wait till eight, but what about the social media piece?
Well, we don't
I think
want it to be taboo. Like, we know that when we tell kids not to do something, it makes them want to do it more. And so it's more of how do we build those structures of learning how to do this with me safely, so that they don't resort to more risky behaviors and extreme measures.
And I think there has to be a literacy around it, right? I mean, I think that in order to develop it, Catherine's in college and Lizzie's in grad school, and they talk to me a lot about how they feel a little bit behind the curve on AI, right? Artificial intelligence. And so a lot of times we talk about social media and artificial intelligence as though they're bad things. They're really powerful tools that our children have to be trained in how to use them. And so I think that once children are in high school, there does need to be a rollout of different means to consume social media and then direct children to it. I mean, LinkedIn is social media, but it is the way that people are getting jobs now. And so I think children setting up LinkedIn accounts and putting their resumes and building their resume over time allows them to, move through educational training in high school to where they're beginning to think about how they get a job. And so I think that it's important, like you're saying early, to have communities where we're having these type of discussions with parents, and we're sharing ideas, and we're talking about what social media does seem to be functional and effective versus what is the stuff that's really not healthy for our children. So it's such a relevant topic, and so many people are interested in it. And it was really a good experience on Tuesday, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do some more talks in the community. Even just in the interest of time, I think it'll be helpful for you to give us the bottom line on social media.
That should be easy, Eve. Take it away.
Like the elevator pitch or the whole
Maybe like what are our key takeaways? What can we as parents realistically do
You're
to,
always a bottom
yeah.
line person.
You
I
guys
am
are
a bottom
great.
line. All right, elevator pitch.
And
Let's
and
go.
can I just make a plug if you have not, so we're just starting this season on the video and the YouTube. If you haven't watched the video, Eve's explanation of the seagull's kind of five fingers in the brain and your prefrontal cortex wrapping around your amygdala and your limbic system. I actually had never seen that before, and I thought it was fantastic. So that alone is worth watching. Sorry, go ahead, Eve. Take it
Let's love
away.
it.
What are our key takeaways and action steps here?
Okay, well, I think the bottom line is that we can't change the world our kids are growing up in, but we can change how they grow up in it. So, as if you're delaying as long as you can, if you're giving yourself grace and you're just being that good enough parent, then I think that like you're on it, right? But I think that there are things too that you can do if you think of the restructuring here, withholding technology, it's not social isolation, it's social protection. And how does that lead you to make the choices for your family? We're never going to outsmart Apple engineers. Honestly, we're not going to outsmart our kids in this one either. And the reality, we are the first generation to raise children with technology from birth. So we don't have the strategies from our parents to try. Our kids know the technology more than we're ever going to know it. And that's just kind of what we're working with. It's not about fear, it's about taking back the parts of childhood that help our kids thrive. And that's what we should be focusing on. So for all ages, we want to model the behavior, which, y'all, this is hard for me because there's always something to do on my phone. We want to model that behavior for our kids. You want to keep technology out of bedrooms overnight. And you may have tech-free zones, like the table at dinner or doing homework. Those should be tech-free zones. The family room should be tech-free zones. Anchoring in those family rituals with game nights and creating these experiences that don't call for technology or even it's not expected for them to have technology. Having those tech agreements with kids, having that reference point. I know Dr. Housen talks a lot about family meetings, and then just encouraging those offline hobbies. So that's a very long bottom line, and I could keep going, honestly.
And I think, with the family meeting, Eve, just the importance of mom and dad or parents being really aligned, because we
Mm-hmm.
talked about how if we're not aligned in the parenting alliance, then our children are very good about joining with that parent who's softer, more permissive, however you think about it. So really, before you sit down with your children, you need to make sure that you and your partner are on board for how you want to do things. If not,
Parental hierarchy.
yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
That's great advice, and thank you, Eve, for those. I mean, you took a very difficult topic and gave us some actionable items and takeaways. So thank you very much. Also, I realized that we never came back to the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations on technology.
Did you have
So
time to Google it?
yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Google. Well, it's funny you say that because it's changing and evolving, right? With if you guys haven't heard that technology and AI is evolving rapidly. So, anyways, you can Google it. It probably wouldn't surprise you that they break it down based on age. I mean, the gist of it, really young kids, try to avoid like as much as you can in terms of like media engagement, but like video chatting with family, that's good stuff. And then limiting screen time as they get older, really choosing high quality programming, right? Because I think we can all agree that not all programming was created equal. So something like Sesame Street, or I even hate to get I don't hate to do this. I know parents have maybe a, I think most parents like Bluey. Is that fair, Eve? I think it's
Oh,
Australian and Bluey's like
I
pretty good.
personally love Louis. I thought you were
Yeah,
gonna say
yeah.
Caillou. I was like, no,
No,
Caillou
I
is
hear
not allowed
Caillou,
in the
and then I
house.
think parents have
Whiny
mixed.
little brat.
Sometimes on the Paw Patrol, I hear mixed, but I love those pups. They're great. So, anyways, and then
Paw
as they
Patrol.
get older, right, like you said, the tech contract, the consistent limits, and modeling, right. And I would just say to parents out there, we all make mistakes, and own it. And our kids need to see us make mistakes and say, "Hey, I'm going to try and do that better next time." So, anyways, I think we could have an entirely follow-up episode on a number of these topics. We would, if you guys, the listeners, have thoughts on things you'd like to be hearing about too, or have follow-up questions, please reach out to us on our social media. Like we said, we're adding the YouTube channel. We're on all the good stuff, the LinkedIns and the Facebooks and all those good things. Um, but Eve, you in the presentation you talked a little bit about it in your bottom line, but you said we can't change the world our kids are growing up in, but we can change how they grow up in it. I thought that was pretty powerful. And then it says, in terms of technology, delay as long as you can, give yourself grace. That's a huge, important reminder, and be a good enough parent. And then, of course, keep parenting for the present. Eve, Matthew, thank you for your thoughts and insight, and we look forward to the next episode. Until then.